Today, 286. Wonderful story. I'm sorry, that didn't work out right there. Wonderful story of love, tell it to me again. Wonderful story of love, wake the immortal strain. Angels with rapture announce it, shepherds with wonder receive it. Sinner, oh, won't you believe it? Wonderful story of love, wonderful story of love, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful story of love, wonderful story of love, though you are far away, wonderful story of love, still need the call to take, calling from Calvary's mountain, down from the crystal bright fountain, in from the dawn of creation, wonderful story of love, wonderful, 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 wonderful story of love, wonderful story of love, Jesus provides a rest, wonderful story of love, for all the pure and blessed, rest in those mansions above us, with those who've gone on before us, singing a rapturous chorus, wonderful story of love, wonderful, 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 wonderful story of love.
It's on now, ain't it? Can you hear me now? Next time I'm up here, I'm gonna sit in the stool, but I'm not gonna sit in the old stool. I'm afraid that new stool spins around too fast. I think there's an ejection button on it. Be my luck. I can stand. I can use a walker better. Walkers do not work good in carpet. And anyway, I'm not complaining. I do want to. I don't do this to embarrass her, but Shay Dozer heads up a good team of healthcare people, and they were all super. She even took my blood one time, first time she ever did it. I thought she used a dagger. I never got it.
You gotta do something with that microphone.
Pull it down.
Yeah, it's got a lot of,
Bring it
pull
down
away
when
from
you
your,
can.
I'm trying
How's
to
that?
pull a lot of the trouble
That
out.
better?
Yeah, that's better.
It is
That better? Okay. We got a guy back here with what he's doing.
Gotta have the other fellow cooperate too.
We had a bank in Bishop, Texas, just one bank. I think there's only one bank there now. And they had one drive-in window. And the teller was always singing. And some people across the street at the Circle K said they didn't appreciate her singing. And the bank manager said, well, I just don't think she's singing that loud. So he went out there to see if she was singing, and she kept on singing after they left. This morning, I want to continue on how is Jesus good news. next week, Mike Gibson's gonna speak. Not that I can't, but he wants to. And then he's gonna go over the next Sunday and terrorize the people of Oak Grove. And I think he's wanting to go terrorize the folks in Pine Grove. Now, that'll be a chore. But anyway, I appreciate Mike wanting to speak, and I said it'd be a good thing that the guys every 5 or 6 weeks take it. And because they all did a good job, everyone that filled in. John Broussard said, "Don't leave me out." And I almost said, I didn't know you was a member here, but I didn't say that. But I want to continue some thoughts from last week about he cares about you. Does anyone care? Does anyone really understand? And you may have the handout from last week. I put it on the screen. The remote's not working right. We're too cheap to go buy good batteries, I guess. I don't know. We need to get a better, that thing's up there as a junk piece. I think it came across on the boat somewhere. The other one that went out is better than that one. So anyway, whatever. What I want you to know this morning is Jesus does care. I want to thank Shay and her group, but I don't want to leave John Hadnot out and his brother and his good wife. They take care of people, and they take care of a lot of it to the last time to take care of it. And one's funeral's tomorrow, and he's been dealing with this since before Herman died, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm going to do a lesson later on about a second chance, because he preached that up there years ago. John got a second chance because he knows Jesus cares. We talked about last week the demonstration of his compassion. People were lost. They may not have known exactly why they were lost, but they were distressed and downcast. They knew something was wrong. And Jesus' heart went out to the lost and hurting people, and his life went out to them as well. In his healing and teaching, he gave his best to meet their needs. And it says something profound and moving, that Jesus saw the crowds around him, not as trouble to be avoided, but as people to be helped. And instead of avoiding the issue or trying to give them the least attention possible, he did all he could for those who surrounded him because he cared about them. Remember, a leper came to him, asking him, falling on his knees, said, if you're willing, you can make me clean. I like Bruce Marciano's portrayal of Jesus. He's the smiling Jesus in the Matthew series. I love the way he did it. The only problem with Bruce is he got stereotyped to that, because people thought he was Jesus. He said he wasn't, and he would definitely say he's not. But the scene they had of Jesus coming down the Sermon on the Mount, the end of Matthew 7, and then Matthew 8, he's tired, the people are tired, and the leper comes up to him, "Sir, if you're willing," and Jesus touches him. And I think we have a hard time really appreciating that touch, how important that touch was. And I'm glad that Jesus said, "I'm willing, be cleansed." I'm glad he didn't say, like the charlatans that sometimes have tents still, as the one that used to come into Texas City and Lamar, and people would come around for miles around wanting to be healed. And the guy would have an altar call and claim he was casting out the demons and claiming he was healing people. And he was, as long as the money kept coming in. And then one night, a tornado came through there and sent over 100 of them to the hospital. And I will never forget Cecil Halfbanger saying the next morning, Cecil was a prince, literally a prince. He said, "I don't want to be unkind, but where was the man's power last night?" They built the first enclosed shopping center over that field. When we left, he was over in Uncle Mark Bowling Alley doing the same thing. Jesus didn't do that. Jesus didn't say, "Well, give me the money and we'll take care of you. If you bleed, you'll." He didn't even require some of that. And Jesus, this is the point I want you to think about. Jesus saw the crowds around him, not as trouble to be avoided, but as people to be helped. Jesus told of the time when Lazarus, a friend of Jesus, had died. And I expounded on that last week. about when he said he was deeply moved when he saw Mary weeping, and the Jews who came with her also weeping. He was deeply moved in spirit. Debbie has a footnote in her Bible that's a good footnote. Sometimes footnotes are not good. The word in the original language I mentioned last week is where it rips you in your insides apart because you're hurting from it, and that's how it affected Jesus. Sometimes the King James Version uses bowels of yearning. We don't say that now. We say compassion. We soften it up. But it rips them apart. And sometimes I've seen when I've done chaplaincy work, whether down at the prison or at the hospital or this other hospitals, I see people hurting. They're distraught. Sometimes they're not very nice. You see them at the worst end, the worst, you see them at their best, but sometimes at the worst. Sometimes their family members aren't very nice. Molly LaSalle called me one New Year's night, said, Keith said, you always said you come down here tonight. She was working at the hospital then. We got a lady that just lost her husband. I knew her. Didn't realize it until I went over into the ER and had a prayer with her, wanted to have a prayer with her, and his daughters cussed me out. I didn't get mad. I just said, I'm sorry, and left. And Molly was all apologetic. I said, that's all right. That's all right. That kind of stuff shouldn't get us upset. In the teaching, in Jesus' teaching, the importance of forgiving others. Remember Jesus told a parable in which a servant had a great debt and begged his master for mercy, and the master felt compassion for the slave and released him and forgave him the debt. And Dwayne's been dwelling on that some in the parables that he's been sharing with you. In another parable, we know the Good Samaritan demonstrated love for his neighbor when he saw a robbery victim and felt compassion in Luke 10, verse 33. And yet another story, when the father, prodigal son, saw his son return, he says in Luke 15, verse 20, he felt compassion for him and ran and embraced him and kissed him. And Jesus obviously believed that the compassion for others was a characteristic his followers should have. He not only said it, he showed it. So I want you to think about this morning about the significance of his compassion. What difference does it make today that Jesus was such a caring person? Is it important for us to tell us that Jesus knows what we're going through? I think it's important. Jesus not only ministered to others' hurts, he also knew the struggles of the human condition himself. The book of Hebrews tells us that since Jesus came to give help to human beings and not to angels, he made to be like his brethren in all things, that he might become a merciful and faithful high priest in things pertaining to God, to make propitiation for the sins of the people. For since he was tempted in that which he has suffered, he is able to come to the aid of those who are tempted. Hebrews 2, verse 17 and 18. And later we read in that book, we do not have a high priest who cannot sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who has been tempted in all things as we are, yet without sin. Let us therefore draw near with confidence to the throne of grace, that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in time of need. Hebrews 4, verse 15, 16. The writer of Hebrews was telling his readers that God was not blind to the difficulties, and he's not blind to your difficulties this morning. Jesus has been right where you are. He's saying Jesus knows what you're going through. He had to know it, experience it. And in fact, he was going to be an effective high priest on our behalf. And not only did Jesus have compassion for the physical plight of those around him, he also had a deep understanding of the moral and spiritual plight of humans. He faced temptations we face. He knew the potential frailties of the flesh because he was flesh and blood himself. And since he faced them and overcame them himself, he's able to serve as our high priest before God. He enables us to receive understanding, assistance, and forgiveness from the throne. Do you balk at that idea? Is it hard for you to think of Jesus as human? Was he tempted to sin? Does he understand our loneliness? We have several here that have lost their mates. They're by themselves. They deal with that loneliness all the time. Some have lost their children. They deal with that loss. Where else can you go but the Lord, the psalm said. And can Jesus relate to the idea of struggling to do God's will? Let's look what the New Testament briefly says about these questions. Jesus reminds us, or Paul reminds us, that Jesus was born of a woman, Galatians 4, verse 4. He also wrote, Philippians 2, verse 7, he emptied himself, taking the form of a bondservant and being made in the likeness of men. How Jesus could still be God at the same time is a mystery to me. But we know that Jesus was indeed a human being. Consider the human emotions and needs that Jesus knew. He was tired, John 14, verse 6. He was thirsty, John 4, verse 7. And angry, Mark 3, verse 5. He felt frustration, Mark 6, verses 5 and 6. And he knew grief, John 11, verse 35. He loved, according to Mark 10, verse 21, and demonstrated patience, Mark 4, verse 34. Here's the thing to think about. His entry in the human predicament did not cause him to walk away in disgust. You remember when Moses was going through the children of Israel? That was the biggest bunch of crybabies and bellyachers you ever read about in your life. And Moses was ready to throw his hands up on more than one occasion. But he didn't. Because he knew God's way was better. And so, like that, think about this. Does Jesus understand how it feels not to want to do God's will? Well, think about him praying in the garden. I never thought about it this way. Luke 22, verse 42. Father, if thou art willing, remove this cup from me, yet not my will, but thine be done. Can he relate to financial insecurity? Well, he pointed out on one occasion that the foxes have holes and the birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. Luke 9, verse 58. Some of you have seen the bed building going on in the community that Brian and Deborah Smith head up. It's a good program. It's a good ministry. I remember somebody referring to a young man that lived in Idaho, didn't even have a bed to sleep in. Didn't have his own house to sleep in. He moved around the neighbors. I don't know whether he got a bed or not. I never thought about that. We always had a bed when I was growing up. I remember when my brother finally was trained, they brought him over to the rollaway bed I was sleeping on. And then we moved to a new home, and Mother and Dad got us twin beds. We had a bed. Well, you might say, well, but he never walked in my shoes. He never was abused by his parents. He never was married. He did not have the pressure to succeed that I faced. I doubt if he was ever tempted to do wrong. It's true that Jesus did not live your life exactly. No one else has ever lived your life exactly, but Jesus did experience all the dynamics of human relationships in one form or another. He was abused by others. He was lied about. He felt pressure to impress people and be popular. And if he could not have sinned, he could not have been tempted. You cannot be tempted to do something that's impossible. I'm never tempted, for instance, to steal an elephant and hide it in my backyard simply because it's impossible for me to do that. Jesus could have sinned, therefore, he was genuinely tempted to be wrong, to do wrong. How could he be tempted if he was still God? Admittedly, the fine points of Jesus' incarnation, becoming a person, he's emptying himself, even though he was still deity, have confounded theologians for centuries. But our best course is to accept what the Bible says and try to understand how it applies to us. Jesus faced more difficulties than almost any one of us. And to quote Hebrews again, you have not yet resisted the point of shedding blood in your striving against sin. Hebrews 12, verse 4. You do not know what it's like. We don't know what it's like to be crucified because of your faith in God, but Jesus does. No doubt you have faced difficult, most unbearable struggles and temptations, but Jesus endured far more than most of us ever will. The real question is not whether or not Jesus can relate to us. The question is whether or not we can relate to all that Jesus went through. He has been through all that we've been through and worse. Jesus had compassion for the difficulties we face. He endured what we had to go through, but without sin, so that he can be a sympathetic intercessor to God on our behalf. His entry into the human predicament did not cause him to walk away in disgust. It touched his heart. And he continues to care and to help because he loves us. And then it comes to the last point this morning, the meaning of his compassion. Somebody might say, well, but wouldn't Jesus ever take an interest in me? How could I ever get near him? And let's consider this. How would you have perceived Jesus if you had lived when he was on the earth? Do you imagine that he had been larger than life, unapproachable? 2,000 years of Christian tradition have caused many to view Jesus in this way. Through medieval paintings and preconceptions, so many think of Jesus as someone who had a glow around him and a halo around his head. They think that people would have cowered in fear and not dared to come near him. They have the perception of a Jesus who is largely unapproachable and therefore think of him as largely unhelpful in the trenches where life is lived. But look again. Jesus mocked as being a friend of tax gatherers and sinners, Luke 7, verse 34. This is evidence he was approachable even by the outcast of society. In the same verse, we get the idea that the Jewish leaders, while perceiving John the Baptist to be too different, disapproved of Jesus because he was too normal. Is that a paradox? Jesus' disciples did not fast or wash their hands in keeping with the strict religious traditions of the day. Jesus ate with the people whom the Jewish leaders disapproved. And all this says that in the Jewish leaders' eyes, he was not distinctive enough. In countless ways, Jesus acted like a normal human being. But there's something about him. Think about this. One last point. Something about him attracted even those whose lives were not completely in order. Jesus was supremely approachable. The leper should not have been circulating around the crowd, but he came to Jesus and Jesus touched him. The woman with the issue of blood in Mark 5, verses 25 through 34, was unclean according to the law and should not have been in the crowd, but she fought through the multitudes to be able to touch Jesus' clothes. Blind beggars cried out to him, and distraught fathers sought his help for their children. Every day, people, even those who were classified as sinners, felt comfortable in Jesus' presence. But something about him attracted even those whose lives were not completely in order. In other reverse illustrations of his approachability, the Jewish leaders were not afraid to question him sharply. The Roman governor, Pontius Pilate, and the Roman soldiers saw no visible reason to tremble in his presence. Jesus was overwhelmingly human, yet he was also divine. Perhaps that explains the drawing power for those who were seeking God's help in God's way. Here was a man who lived without show, who cared about common people and their needs, and who also demonstrated a connection with God that no one had ever seen before. He lived as he did in order that what was spoken through Isaiah the prophet might be fulfilled, saying, he himself took our infirmities and carried away our diseases. Matthew 8, verse 17. Divine compassion with skin on. That was Jesus. And so, in conclusion, more properly, we can say that is Jesus. In the words of William Barclay, I like what he wrote. Jesus should have been seen as someone who did things, but who does things. The greatest danger of Christianity is to think of Jesus as someone to be remembered. He's someone to be experienced and met. Jesus is not present on earth to heal people and raise the dead as he once did. But that should not discourage us. After all, those deeds were primarily signs that pointed to Jesus' true identity as the Son of God. What has not changed is the fact that Jesus, as the living Son of God, cares. He has compassion for us. He knows what we can go through because he has been there. It helps us know that someone cares. Jesus does, and that's good news. And God knows we need good news. I have a good friend, a Lutheran pastor friend of mine. I became friends years ago when he and Beth lost their son. And we've been friends ever since. When I come out of a heart cath in Texas City, and he's standing there holding my wife's hand, I will never forget that. Came all the way up from Bishop, 6-hour drive, just to be with us. And the little Lutheran liberal, we called him, came over to John Seeley and wanted to read scripture with me. I'm not going to turn it down. The Gil Beth went through a bad state of depression when they lost their son. And he said, you know, we just have to hang in there. We just have to keep on keeping on. The man I got that phrase from was named David Hollow. And some of you met him before, maybe. Or with the Raylan, you ever meet him when he preached down out of Port Arthur? I think he was from Warren area. But David was in Texas City. We had a bus ministry. Maxine made the puppets. I didn't know that. We were bus captains and teachers, and he was always saying, keep on keeping on. And then he went on up to school preaching that he shouldn't have gone to. And then he went to another one, and he came forward. He said, I need your prayers. And we didn't know that his personal life had gone to the devil. His wife left him. He didn't throw his towel in. He didn't quit. To the day he was almost dying, he was still bringing people to the Lord and teaching them and baptizing. I never got to see him when all that happened. A good friend of mine down at Meadows did, and her mother said, we made sure we went to David's funeral. I'd like to have a homecoming like that. Sometimes you have family homecomings. I think the spiritual homecomings are those who've gone on from this congregation. And the great reunion is going to take place one of these days. Can you imagine missing out on that? Jesus cares. Oh, he cares. I tell you what, this thing with me has thrown me a curveball like it's never thrown. It's worse than open heart surgery. And I've been there almost 28 years now. But it's getting stronger. And this coming Friday, we're going to see the surgeon. And I'm going to drill him, Shay, with some questions. I'm going to point blank ask him, did you foul up? Diane said you are not. I am going to ask him. I don't know why we weren't told this. But she said you had to get fixed anyway, so I don't know what that means. This morning, he loves you. If you think Jesus doesn't care, you're wrong. He cares. That's good news for a change. When people let us down, maybe in our personal life, maybe in our family life, Jesus still cares. When we lose loved ones, he still cares. In fact, there's a song that we sing every once in a while. Does Jesus care? He does. First time I remember singing that at a funeral, a dear lady named Betty Pitts singing with us. And Betty was on her third bout with cancer. In 1988, she passed away. She knew Jesus cared. This morning, if you're so blessed for any reason, won't you come and sing a song next week?
Days are filled